Hi, I'm Lynn Danaher. I'm one of the founders of the Friday Harbor Film Festival, and I'm here with Tasha Van Zandt, who is the filmmaker for After Antarctica, which is a pretty impressive film. I'm thrilled that you're here to chat with us this evening and answer some questions that I certainly have about the film. And so anyway, I just asked you how long the film took, and you said it's been how many years?
Well, it's been around 4 years since we started formal production, but I grew up in Minnesota where Will was a huge hero of mine. So it's really kind of been a lifelong journey, but I met Will around 9 years ago.
Wonderful, wonderful. So you live in the same area as Will?
Not anymore. I live on the West Coast now, but I grew up in Minnesota, and he lives in northern Minnesota. So he was really a local legend there growing up.
I bet. I remember for some reason I have this. I'm a member of the Explorers Club, and one of the I'm actually a VP of the Explorers Club and served on the board for many years. And one of those images that are just emblazoned in my mind is Will. I think it's a Rolex ad of him, with the transcontinental Antarctic expedition. I don't know. Was he wearing a Rolex? I gotta know. Was he wearing a?
I don't think he was wearing a Rolex on the expedition, but maybe he does travel in style, so it's a possibility, I
Well,
guess.
it could very well have been that, they inspired him, he inspired, so they used that as an
That's
inspiration. So
pretty
they're one
cool.
of the, yeah, yeah. So that was a real image emblazoned in my mind. And what's interesting is his Antarctic expedition was in 1989. How old were you in 1989?
So I was just being born. I'm in my 30s, and yeah, I mean, prior to that, he had also done the incredible North Pole expedition, 1986.
Right.
So many big expeditions. But yeah, when I was really young, I remember receiving a copy of National Geographic with pictures inside and putting them on my walls. And from the Arctic Ocean to Greenland, Antarctica, North Pole, there's so many journeys that we were able to follow over the years.
Yes, I appreciate that. And 89 is a watershed year because I was a commercial fisherman in Alaska. That's the year the Exxon Valdez crashed into Bly Reef and everything changed in Alaska. Everything. So it's interesting that was also. I'm pretty sure that year I was so caught up in that horrible trauma that I missed that. But I do remember the National Geographic issue. And I have read about his expeditions, and it's pretty extraordinary. He's really an extraordinarily powerfully focused person.
He really
And
is.
he really is. I really like one of the comments you said at the very end about it when you're on an expedition, and I've been on many expeditions, and you have one person in that expedition that has doubt. It's like
Mhm.
a poison. It's like a disease that spreads through the expedition. I could not agree with him more. That is an absolute truth. You all have to stay. Expeditions are they're small groups of people, totally focused, and they have to really, really work in concert for the success of the expedition. So, have you been
It's
to Antarctica?
Yeah, so the present day footage in the Arctic and Antarctica, that production was by myself and my partner, Sebastian Zek. So we documented as a really small two-person team across the Arctic and in Antarctica with Will.
Fabulous. Fabulous. I'm just curious. I know I had a very good friend that I spent a month in Antarctica, and I had a good friend who was a dog, and he specialized in dogs in Antarctica. He was a dog handler actually for the British Antarctic Survey, And he told me that they eliminated dogs from Antarctica. Do you remember what year that was? Because I was trying to remember.
I think this was one of the last years of the expedition, of being able to have the expedition with dogs. Uh, you know, as yeah, so I think around then, around that time. But that's so amazing. You spent a month in Antarctica. I want to hear stories about that too. Yeah.
Well, it was great, and I actually worked with Jeff Renner, who had been part of the British Antarctic Survey. I actually worked with him in Alaska, but I so distinctly remember him telling me the stories of. He told me all about Vostok and all kinds of interesting places in Antarctica. But I was really curious about when the dogs, because I thought the dogs had been eliminated before '89, so I couldn't remember the year. And so those dogs and what happened, because somebody I was watching the film with kept worrying about the dogs. So I'm just
Well,
curious what happened.
yeah, so that's really how Will got started in expeditions, was through dog sledding. And so the majority of his major expeditions around that time were all dog sled expeditions. And the team really bred the dogs for polar conditions. So they were in many ways team members, just like the rest of the team. And you know, Will often says, had it not been for the dogs, they wouldn't have been able to do this crossing in the way that they did.
Interesting, interesting. Well, I often think Shackleton is one of my great heroes, and you know, I've read a lot about his extraordinary expeditions, and I wondered if Will ever reflected on one of Shackleton's one question that was asked was, why do you go back to Antarctica over and over again? And I believe his answer went something like, it's all the little voices. Have you heard that quote?
Oh, I don't know if I have, but tell me more about
It's
that.
Well, it's fascinating because I wonder what is it that draws anyone really to these. I personally prefer the tropics, but I but I spent a lot of years in Alaska and I spent some time in Antarctica, so I know all about it. But I'm just curious what that was reflecting. I just wondered if he ever mentioned anything, because that's what when they asked Shackleton, why do you keep going back? Because I think he went 3 times altogether, and he said it's all the little voices, and I'm wondering what is that
Yeah,
exactly?
I mean,
What
for Will,
any
yeah,
I was
I mean, I can't answer directly for him, but I think just having gotten to know Will so well over the years, that the polar regions really have a special place in Will's heart. I mean, on a personal level, I think when you're on a solo expedition or traversing these routes that he has crossed, you have to be so incredibly present. So,
right,
you know, as
yes.
he says in the film, it's like a mobile Zen monastery, a walking meditation. But then also on a global level, um, it's these places that seem so far away and foreign and remote that have such an impact on the rest of the world. And he's really used his expeditions as platforms to bring awareness to the changes taking place in our polar region. So I think it's kind of that duality of both the personal draw to these otherworldly, mind-blowing landscapes and places where you just are completely present, but also just the importance of these places and our need to protect them, and using as platform as a tool to bring awareness to that.
Oh, I completely agree. I was thrilled with the Antarctic Treaty when everybody, you know, and what's interesting is that 50-year agreement that was 30 years ago or over 30 years ago. And I remember when they drilled through the ice in Vostok, that was a big deal because there was a big argument as to whether or not they should drill down to the liquid water in Vostok because of pollution. They knew that that was an absolute pure environment down there, untouched for millions of years. And so I'm, you know, we're going to have to re-up that treaty and make sure that we protect Antarctica. Um, I know that there's been several surveys that have gone across the ice cap, and there's valleys and mountains, and there's actually rivers underneath because the pressure of the ice keeps the liquid and flowing. So it's fascinating when you look at Antarctica from like a satellite view. It just looks like this big dome of white ice, but it's really a very complicated topography continent. I mean, it has everything that all the other continents have. So
it's very
I have,
true. I remember one of the first things Will said after meeting him was that a melted drop in Antarctica ripples throughout the rest of the world. And it's so true that these changes happening in this place that does seem so far away, it really, we're all interconnected. And it's just a fascinating landscape and place. It is, in many ways, does feel like going to another planet when you're there. It's so unlike anything I've experienced elsewhere. So it's really a special, special place.
yeah, and it really is. And like when he talked about that 80 miles of the Larsen R ship that's gone, I mean, like, whoa, that's a big, big piece of ice. I mean, that's a huge amount, 800 feet thick. Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, that's impressive. And
Yeah.
I've one of the areas I always wanted to go to was the dry valleys because there's actually areas in Antarctica that are absolutely desert.
Mm-hmm.
And there are areas you can actually go and collect meteors, and because it has been so completely undisturbed. I have a friend who does that, so that's why I know about this. And
Amazing.
it's like, I mean, it's one of the best places on the planet to collect meteor remnants. So I
So
just think
fascinating.
it's absolutely. And then they have that new contraption, that new building that they actually can move. They built that new research center that
Yeah.
actually is on. It's portable. So I'm very excited about the research they're doing down there. And I have to tell you, it's so important to have young people like yourself making these kinds of films, reminding everybody about what has been accomplished in the past and what we need to stay focused on moving forward in the future. So I really celebrate you for that reason.
Thank you.
You're
Well, I'm
welcome.
glad to be a part of this festival, and it's such a great community and so many incredibly impactful films. So very excited to be talking with you, especially given all of your expeditions you've done too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, most of mine, I was in Antarctica working actually on probably a ship like the similar one that you were on. I was driving Zodiac and that. So I wasn't actually doing research in Antarctica, but I was sure getting around and seeing a lot of interesting places. Zodiac's definitely the way to go. But most of my research has been in Polynesia.
Oh,
So yeah, so that's where I go with intention to recover certain kinds of information, primarily archaeoastronomy and ancient sites, things like that. So, but now I want to ask you about Will. He's dealt with cancer, and he's on the mend. It sounds like that's a good, he's definitely on the flip side of all of that. What is he doing now? What's his primary focus?
yeah. So Will is doing great, and he turned 77 this last year and is just as active as ever. He's living in still in northern Minnesota, and has been working on the Seeger Wilderness Center, which you see a little bit of at the end of the film, and doing really great programs there. And then also has his nonprofit Climate Generation that does a lot of fantastic work around climate change awareness and education in the classroom, policy work, and eyewitness storytelling. So he's been keeping really busy. And then these last few months, we've been able to travel to festivals together again, which has been really special to be reunited after this last year and a half or so.
How's the film been received at the film festivals? I can't imagine. I wonder if people, did they forget about the expedition, the Transantarctic expedition, and it was kind of like this great reminder, and then it was, and then you kind of brought us all up to date. I mean,
I think it's been so special getting to watch it with audiences and hear their responses and reactions. There's so many people who had followed the expedition closely and other people who had not been familiar with it before. But I think, ultimately in so many ways, it's a story of holding on to hope in the face of the unknown and that power of perseverance. And, right now we are all facing such an unknown. There's so many things that we're facing around the climate crisis and the pandemic. So seeing someone like Will and his story, I know for me personally, has been so inspiring of just the power of what someone can achieve when they set their mind to a common goal. And Will's definitely someone who throughout his life has set his mind on a North Star and then traversed any peaks and valleys to make it happen. So yeah, we've been having a lot of really great responses from people, and it's been fun to get to see different reactions from people of all ages.
Oh, that's great, because it's such an important message, and I really honor him and you for conveying this message to multiple generations. I mean, for him to have accomplished what he did with the Antarctic Treaty and everything, and bringing all that awareness forward, and now we've reached that point where we need to think about re-upping that, and keep, and just hearing descriptions like 80 miles, the ice shelf was stretched out 80 miles. That's that was really, and I've seen that in Alaska too. I've seen glaciers that have melted that I used to walk up to, and now they have to get in a boat and drive around the corner, and drive for 40 minutes to get to the edge of the glacier. It's astounding how much melting has occurred. And so I'm really, really, I really appreciate the message and and his integrity for sticking to it, and your integrity and focus for telling the story. I really, yeah, it was a really, really important story, and I hope people enjoyed it. And you continue to screen it moving forward.
Thank you.
And are you going to be screening in New York anywhere, or anywhere else in Honolulu, or?
Yeah, we're making plans currently to follow along with additional screenings. People can head to afterantarctica.com, and we're constantly updating our screenings page. And then we're also, end of next week, heading to the UN Climate Summit to do a screening there, which we're really excited about, in partnership with the organization Voice for Nature. So we're really thrilled about that. And then several festivals right now too. And then also, if people are interested, we're also launching our impact campaign for people to be able to take action around the film. Because in so many ways, the film is Will's personal eyewitness story, but even as you shared with your experience in Alaska and the changes that we're all now seeing in our own backyards, we're all now these eyewitnesses and all have a story to tell. So we're doing an impact campaign of screenings and helping people share their own eyewitness stories, which people can follow along with at afterantarctica.com too.
And where is that again? Repeat that, please.
Yeah, it's afterantarctica.com.
Okay, great. Well, I want everybody to go to afterantarctica.com and do tell your stories, because I think we've all had eyewitness accounts of what we've seen, especially those as old as me and Will. And I think my sense is it's accelerating. And so that's the other concern, is the pace of which things are changing. And so I hope and pray that you're successful, and we're all successful, and we all wake up and pay attention. And this film certainly does that. It certainly brings that awareness to the forefront. And I just can't thank you enough for making this extraordinary effort. And tell Will how much we appreciate his efforts as well, please.
I will. Well, thank you so much for all the work that you're doing, and we're so glad to share the film with you all.
Harbor Film Festival is all about getting the word out. It's to, you know, entertain, inspire, and enlighten. Those are the three key words that set our mission forward. And so it's really important that all the filmmakers come together so that with us, so that we can convey their important stories. So I feel enlightened after this film. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Aloha. Thank you, Mark.